No, we should call it Anna Green Gables podcast.
Yeah, you're right.
Starring this week we're talking about Starship Troopers. I'm sorry, we're completely derailing this already. But it's all right.
Hello and welcome to the inaugural episode of Page and Screen. We are a book club for movie lovers, a movie club for book lovers. We read the book, we watch the movie, and we offer our unwarranted opinion. My name is Calvin, and I think Robert Heinlein is a Nazi.
So I'm Doug, Winnipeg, and I was happy to do this. I was always a fan of the movie, and I'm glad I read the book.
My name is Ashton, and I really do enjoy. I'm a big fan of the movie as well. The book was interesting for how different it actually was.
Hi, I'm Jesse Mully, and I used to like the movie until I read the book. Now I wish, the book was fully adapted into a movie, and the movie Starship Troopers was called something else.
So on this episode, we're discussing Starship Troopers. Starship Troopers, the novel, was written by Robert A. Heinlein in 1959, and Starship Troopers, the movie, was directed by Paul Verhoeven in 1997. All right, so I figured we would start with the book right here, Starship Troopers. What, oh boy, I don't even know. What did everyone think?
I think Jesse should start because he seems to have the most.
Yeah, Jesse's fired up about this.
Well, I watched the movie first, like many other people, and never really gave the book any thought. And I loved the movie as a kid. It was cool. It had all the action and sci-fi stuff. But after reading the book, I felt like, because I've been told the movie was satire. I think this in itself is the satire. There's no possible way this civilization could work. And I would have loved to have seen just literally everything from this book put onto the movie. The power armor is a big deal. The skinnies are also a very big part of the book. So I feel like they really need to make a movie adaptation of this of the book, and rather the movie can be called something else. I don't want to bash on the movie, but I feel like a lot of it was left out that would have made for an entertaining film. But yeah, I loved how rather the army had been gone from a huge, massive fighting unit down to these small squads of essentially living tanks, right? These one-man army kind of deals that operate as a pack. And I think that's way more interesting than just having the movie where they just hordes and hordes of people that run on the beaches of Normandy at the time, right? The warfare obviously would have changed. That type of warfare suits the bugs, really, right? They're all about, expending whatever warrior castes they can to get the job done. Whereas when you read this, it seems like the mobile infantry, they do their best to make sure that they care about every single individual. At least the lieutenant character in it is always busy trying to watch after his troops and stuff. But the politics, I think, were handled okay in the movie, but they weren't explained as well as they were in the book, right? Because just reading the whole way the Terran Federation works, it's really silly. Just it can't work it that way. I don't think that's the movie was trying to portray satire. This book is satire in on itself. So I would have just liked to have seen this. Literally, this could have just been its own movie and done.
What did everyone else think? Doug, did you have any thoughts?
I thought the book was a good book. With the exception of and I'm sure we'll talk about this at length, but there were a lot of sermonizing of ideas, and those were the parts of the book I didn't like. They added another layer to the onion, but overall, I found those parts of the book either got me angry, or I found I was having trouble tuning into him. But for the vast majority of it, they would go in length about exactly how things worked, how the power armor looked, and I found myself just sitting there reading about the way he's describing the world and thinking. The thing is in 1959 when this was made, people didn't have the same. We're kind of spoiled by modern science fiction because nowadays we can look at something that we've seen on television that's probably been shown to us, right? Like, but the thing is in 1959, if you're a kid reading this book, you don't have a frame of reference for power armor, and so you have to imagine it, right? But it's nice because for me, as I was reading it, I just kept having this idea of like Halo slash Edge of Tomorrow slash just all the power armors you've seen, and so it makes it easier for me. And then they go into the boot camp. It's one of those things where as I was reading the book, because I'm a fan of the movie, I was expecting there to be more like war in it.
Yeah,
but really,
sure.
like I'm reading the book, I'm on like chapter 10. I'm like, where is the war here? Like it opens with its war against the skinnies, and then it goes to like his coming of age story, going to boot camp, having like high school issues, and then like chapter 10, he's still talking about just joining and then chapter 11 is like, oh yeah, okay, so I guess there's actually war in this in a book called Starship Troopers. But anyways, overall, I really enjoyed it, and I look back and I kind of agree with Jesse in the sense that I actually enjoy the book more, but I disagree with him a little bit. I actually enjoy the movie a little bit more as well, I think.
Ashton, what did you think? I'll leave my thoughts for last because I feel like they'll be the loudest. But
I'm very like I was. How do I say this? I was lukewarm to the book overall. I didn't dislike the book, but I think that it's like Doug said, it spent a lot of time kind of meandering until about like chapter 11, until it actually got going with something that like you would expect from a Starship Troopers book about war. And it felt to me, the plot felt very thin, and it felt like more of a soapbox for Heinlein to get on and talk about his political things. He spent like half the book talking about his political ideology, or this political ideology, whether it's the one that he truly believes is his or not. So yeah, there'd be like whole chapters on how children weren't spanked enough, so that's why the downfall of society and all this stuff, and you're like, this is absurd, but like, right? So I was pretty lukewarm to it in that regard, but like once it did get going and like near the end, like there's the war on the skinnies that I liked that, and then like near the end with the war with the bugs, it was good in that regard, but I think that it was pretty thin on plot and a little bit more like more of a manifesto. It felt like reading a manifesto.
So my thoughts on it were, I had never watched the movie, never read the book. This was like my first. The first thing that I did was read the book, and it's so strange because like I had a conversation with Jesse before we decided to do this, where we were talking about Starship Troopers, and I had seen like glimpses of the movie or whatever, or I'd heard people talk about the movie, and I was like, oh, like it sounds like an analogy for the Vietnam War, which was like all the rage for 80s science fiction movies with like aliens and stuff like that. So I was like, that sounds cool. Like that's something that I would totally be into. And then we were also talking, so because we were talking about reading the book, and I was talking about another book called The Forever War by Joe Haldeman, which is a fantastic book. I read The Forever War years ago, and I love that book because it's similar to Starship Troopers. It's military science fiction, and it's about them fighting this like unknown threat that's like really far off into space. The difference is Joe Haldeman was like vocally anti-war. Like he was a veteran. He came out of it with like PTSD. He came out of that and wrote this science fiction book that was about all of those themes. It was about the nature of how like war is extremely damaging to its veterans. It's extremely damaging to societies and whatnot. I love The Forever War. And so having that conversation at the same time as we were having it about Starship Troopers, I was like, okay, yeah, I'm going to go read Starship Troopers. thinking that this book would be somewhat like the Forever War. And then I start and like legitimately got like maybe 3/4 of the way through it. And I was like, this doesn't seem to be like criticizing anything. This seems like he's fully on the side of this. And I kept waiting for the boot to drop. I kept waiting for Rico to like talk about the things that happened to us were horrible or blah blah blah. Never came up. He was so on board with everything that started, all of the horrible things that started to happen, like people dying in boot camp and stuff like that. And I was just like, this seems like, is he serious about this? Like, does he believe in these things? Before I fully finished the novel, I think I started Googling it, and I was like, oh wow, I'm not the first person to think this. A lot of people think this book is propaganda. I had never thought of a science fiction book like that, because it seems like science fiction is so often is about like the ills of modern society and how that can lead you down a bad, like, which I guess is what he's doing, but like it is so incredibly dark, and the future that he's talking about is so incredibly disturbing and offensive, like just straight up offensive. Reading it and I'm like, this can't be real. So I read it twice. I read it again after I finished it, now knowing what Robert Heinlein stands for. And like I'm reading it over and I'm like, oh my God, of course. Like it's obviously been called fascist because of the like nature of this militaristic society that he's talking about. The fact that only veterans vote is like advocating for corporal punishment and for capital punishment. He was vocal about anti-communist sentiment during the Cold War. Like I feel like he and Joseph McCarthy probably would have been best pals. He probably thought Charlie Chaplin was a communist. The guy sounds unhinged, to say the least. And like the second time around, I just caught certain things about like character development and plot development that I thought was so strange. Rico barely seems to be a character in the book. It felt like he had this message to get across, and he didn't really care to develop any like real character or story to go with it. There is a story, and some of it's fantastic. Like, you know, like there's some solid science fiction concepts in there that are great, but like for the most part, like Rico's just like kind of along for the ride as he's like being fed all of these lines from Robert A. Heinlein, and half the time I'm just like, I don't understand this character's motivation. The whole part in the book where he's gonna drop out of the mobile infantry, and then like he receives a letter from his professor.
Oh yeah.
And then after the letter, he's like, wow, I guess I don't want to drop out of the mobile infantry. I'm just like, what?
Yeah.
That
Well,
was the
and
point.
like you said too, I 100% agree. I think a lot of people would argue that his arc in the story is that he learns to be a good soldier and to always respect his authority. But I'm like, but he always did from the beginning. Like I never really got an impression that he never did that. You know,
Yeah.
like it's really strange.
Just to go back on that, like when Dubois sent that letter, like of course he was talking about how like a militaristic society like this could work, and they were talking about all this. But when the Dubois letter was sent, that was the part of the book where I'm just like, wow, this is like it pushed it further. And the problem, and I think the problem that a lot of people have with this book, and I agree with, is that he portrays all of these like this world and talks about the philosophy behind this world, but he never presses against that in like a negative way. If it was a true fascist society, you know, he never talks about, oh, this society, you know, if you were wrong in the society, you disappeared, right? Like those are hallmarks of a fascist society, right? But he never talks about that part of a fascist society. He only talks about the trains are running on time situation, right?
Yeah.
And Jesse wants to say something. What are you gonna say?
Yeah, so like completely agree with that. He goes on to say, why hasn't there been any riots or revolts in our society? Because there's nothing to revolt against. No. You know what I mean? Like he just plucked that out of the air. And I was like, I can definitely tell you that there would be people rioting if they had this type of society. If they didn't have a right to decide their own future. He goes on to say, like, this was actually like one of the sinister things about it. The line was something like, if you take the aggression out of them, you turn you turn the aggressive ones into the sheepdogs,
And the sheep stay in line.
and the sheep stay in line. And I was like,
Yeah.
ooh, that kind of like gave me chills. I was like, the reason why they don't ride is they take all these hyper aggressive points and funnel them into the authoritarian kind of mindset.
There are roundabout ways that he does in press against it, but it's not obvious. Like, for instance, the fact that so this is a worldwide global society, but everybody speaks English perfectly, right? And that's
Yeah.
and so that's one of those things where, like, even now with my culture, like with Native Americans, with people all over the world, like when a greater power comes in, they sanitize the culture out of like a lot of other cultures, right? This story, which was, by the way, a twist in my book, where you find out that Johnny is Filipino the entire time.
At the end of the book, like in the last
Yeah,
the last 2 pages,
the last page
he's
is like
speaking Tagalog. Yeah.
And it's just like, I'm like, it was literally as like a sixth sense shock to me, because I was imagining the entire book him being like Hispanic or something, right? And then
Sure, yeah.
or like, this taking place in South America. But see, the thing is about that is it also shows that at this point in history, there's a loss of language and culture there because everybody has been sanitized. And I guess you can say that's a point against the world that he builds, but also some people could even say that, if people don't have their culture anymore, there's no point in fighting against this, right? Like so in a way, it could be, depending on your point of view, it could be a criticism against the world or a point for the world.
I was really like one quote he had in there where he said, the universe has to decide whether or not we're right. The character at least believes that their government is right, but the universe itself will decide whether or not they have the right to exist. And like, you know what I mean? I don't know if it's satire or not now that I'm talking with you guys, and it scares me if he was like you're just pointing out things and I'm like going through it again. I'm like, yeah, there's like this chunk right here where the story, he's just like going with the story, and then here he's like inserting all this political dogma, and I'm like, oh my god. So
you got it,
Yeah.
Jesse. You got it.
Yeah, no.
He indoctrinated you.
Jesse was just like, you just nodded.
Yeah, like there's God, what was I had marked something down. Yeah, there's so one of the things that happens a lot is when characters die, he mentions it like just in passing. Like he's like, oh yeah, like
his head came off.
Yeah, it's like Flores died on the way up, and
Carl
like,
died.
Yeah, exactly, and like two of our company got froze to death in the mountains or whatever, and I'm just like, okay, cool. So how do you feel about that? like literally, I was like, can we just like take a second to emote?
I can also see it because like when I read that in a book, I try to also connect it back to the story. Society at that point in history has been, like, in a way, life is seen as a disposable commodity. Yes, he doesn't show emotion when death is involved, but it also could be a sign of the way people are in that time.
At first I was just kind of reading it as something like that, as like, oh, like maybe this is just like a very stoic society. That's just like where we're kind of getting this from. But like at the same time, I'm just like, I know, like I like having like read about like all of the controversy surrounding this book and why there's so, and like who Robert Heinlein was. I'm like, I don't buy that. I don't necessarily think that's the case. I feel like he was just so into like spouting his nonsense that like he just forgot to like actually do any real character development. I don't know.
I also think that his whole thing about corporate punishment, I also think that actually has something to do with, and I forgot to look this up, but there was a guy named Dr. Spock back in like the 50s and 60s, and he was a guy who coined the idea that you should never punish a child or it'll like prevent them from becoming like a full human or something. So I think in a way this book is also heavily related in the time frame that it is, right? Because it was a big conversation starter back in the 50s and 60s about your children, right? I don't know.
Well, like no, for sure, because like he also like full on calls them out. He's like, oh, like they call themselves social workers and child psychologists. And I'm like,
and
dude, like how insane do you have to be to like have this vendetta against social workers and child psychologists? Or you're like, fuck those people. I can't believe they're trying to like empathize with a child. Like what?
besides the actual like doctrine and story, what do you guys think about like the description of technology and things like that?
Yeah, I like that. I like the power suits. The skinnies, I would have liked to see more, or like heard more about what the skinnies were and what they were all about. We just kind of got thrown into this like battle with the skinnies.
Also, like very early into the novel, he just like burns up a civilian because he's like,
Yeah, that
I don't
comes out
have
of his
time to.
house.
He's like, I don't have time to deal with this, so he just incinerates this civilian. And I'm just like, whoa, holy shit! I'm like, way to introduce your main character.
Every one of these suits have nuclear weapons with them, because he's just like looks at a hill and goes, "Oh, I'll nuke that," and that way the fallout will like the blast will blind most of them, and then the fallout will like hurt the rest of them. And like they're giving nuclear ordnance to individual soldiers, which we kind of did see in the movie, but like they're just way over like armed. They just destroy everything. But like you learn that it was actually a raid to like coerce the skinnies into not really siding with the Terran Federation, but just getting the message that, hey, we're going to do a lot worse to you than what the pseudo-arachnids will.
Yeah, for that time, like the technology that he was describing and even the design of the alien species, like the arachnids, it was super unique and super influential. Like there's no denying that like this book has had like a very lasting effect on the genre. Like, you know, power armor, as you were saying, like has come up so often in like Halo, or like
StarCraft.
Fallout and stuff like that, and yeah, StarCraft. So it's obviously like hugely influential. Even like the genre of military science fiction is an extremely popular genre, and I think it's mainly because of this book.
I also like the fact that they talk about Camp Curry, like they talk about Southern Alberta, like that was another thing as I was reading it. They talk a lot about like the Great Northern Plains and the Rocky Mountains and Camp Curry, and that's all like if you're reading this or if you're listening to this podcast and you don't know, we're all based out of Calgary, so he's describing this area of the world, but at the same time, I don't think he's ever stepped to here because he's also describing it as like a wasteless tundra that's like people are like dying.
The North Pole was like a mile away.
And I'm just thinking to myself, I'm like, there's no way he's describing Southern Alberta. But then again, I also thought about it. I'm like, well, this could also be post-nuclear war. So it may be that northern Canada is slightly colder than we know today. But at the same time, that's also just trying to help him out because obviously he wrote this. He's like, oh, Camp Curry's in Canada. It's a northern plain. It's probably it's probably devoid of human life and
yeah, like the multiculturalism was so strange. Like you'd keep seeing like these like German characters and like a Japanese character. Okay, are they American? Like what is the Terran Federation? Does that encompass Earth and other planets, or is it just Earth?
That's why the Tagalog twist at the end was so huge because, well, he describes an American style school system, an American style world, but you don't ever think to yourself, oh, he must be talking about the Philippines, right? And then the main character, with the exception of his name, up until the last like 2 pages, he could have been any Spanish speaker on the planet. He could have been wherever.
Yeah.
And so it's almost a sad world that like the way he presents it as being the best world, but it's almost a sad world when I frame it that way for myself. It's just like the Filipino culture is dead, and it bothers me a little bit when I was reading it. It bothered me a little bit that he didn't push against that a little bit more.
Because like at the very end, he talks about it in terms of like, oh, like keeping up traditions and stuff like that. But it's like, where was this the rest of the book? Like this never comes up until like the very end. It doesn't make any sense. Like, especially when you think about like how science fiction looks now, you know, stuff like Blade Runner or Sunshine and stuff like that.
Mass Effect even.
Or Mass Effect, and how how multicultural those genres are, it feels very strange reading a book like this, because it's like, this is clearly written by an American. It clearly has like a distinctly American voice to it. And then tossing in the Filipino twist is such a like throwaway thing and feels
Yeah.
so jarring because of it. Yeah. Anyone have any last thoughts to talk about regarding the book?
I do, and it's about the fact that they use hypnotism so casually.
Like, you're talking about the sleep, about how they like
Yeah.
put them to sleep with
Yeah, and
hypnotic.
there's literally ones that can
Yeah.
make them just kill themselves if they get caught by bugs. They mutter a phrase to
Right.
themselves and they die. And I'm like, that seems like another way that this kind of government controls them. But how do you know who's hypnotized and who isn't? Like, he just kind of throws it in there, and I'm like, and there's also like telepaths in this as well, like psychic. And I know there is in the movies, but it's almost like that Secret Service kind of deal.
Oh, sorry, I cut you off. But it was less pronounced, the psychic. Like, the only time I got the psychic vibe was when they're on that planet and they had that security agent show up and he was like listening to the ground. Like,
Yeah.
he didn't have any equipment with him. He was just believing that underneath it was and I was like, oh, and at first I was like, oh, he must be listening somehow. And then I thought about it, I'm like, oh yeah, he was doing like psychic projection to like figure out what was under the ground or whatever. And at the same time, like the hypnotizing thing, like back in the 50s, that's when that whole thing started, right? Where people really started to like imagine what you can do with hypnotism, and it became like a Cold War hysteria sort of situation. And so I think that was also a response. Yeah.
Oh, I did have one note here that I wanted to bring up that I thought was interesting. Yeah, no, so there's a part here where he's like, we needed to learn more about bug psychology. Must we wipe out every bug in the galaxy, or was it possible to trounce them and impose a peace? We did not know. We understood them as little as we understand termites. And I'm just like, I'm sorry, why do you not understand termites? Like, it's so weird that he's comparing this alien civilization to something that's on Earth. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure people have studied termites. Like, maybe, I don't know, maybe all the big termite studies happened after the 50s, but it's like, dude, like, what do you mean you don't understand termites? Like, it's so weird to compare something that's like, it's just so strange that he's like, oh, like, they're like termites, like, we don't know what those are. Like, yeah.
I did look up a couple stuff on this, and people say that there's like, basically his idea of like, when people call them the pseudo-arachnids bugs, and when they call the other race skinnies, like they're almost like derogatory terms towards them.
Oh yeah, for sure. Okay, so Starship Troopers, the movie, directed by my boy Paul Verhoeven in 1997. Again, never saw this movie until literally yesterday. Yeah, let's have some thoughts on the movie.
So I'll clarify here. I don't hate this movie, but I think that if they would have stuck a little bit closer to the book again, I would have liked it now more that I've read the book. But the things about the movie that I do love, number one, the the special effects still hold up today. When I rewatched it 2 days ago, whoever designed the bugs, the arachnids, I love that design. They totally, like, that is something so alien, but like these giant praying mantis spider looking things. But they also have different types of bugs, which I really love. They have the hopper bug, the tank bug, the artillery bug. So I loved how they're all kind of in these little classes and units. And like, apparently a lot of the props that they made for this movie got recycled into many more movies for Hollywood, like the guns, the ships, the bugs and stuff like that. I love the design of all the ships. I think they have like a very rugged, like super American military look to them. They're all very blocky and chunky and kind of inefficient, but that's the whole point. And like, because I talked to you about like the casting and whatnot, and it was, I think Doug said he purposely made it very whitewashed for the casting and whatnot. I don't mind the casting, but I like to, now that I've read the book, I'd like to see everybody who they were portrayed to play better. And I'm not bashing Casper Van Dien, because whatever, like,
God, never.
He played a good role in it, but
Wow.
no, like it's an okay movie. It's just, now that I've read the book, I'm conflicted about it.
So I love the movie. I've always loved the movie. It's probably like I first watched the movie when I was a little kid, probably too young to watch the movie. That's how little I was when I first saw this. And I have appreciation for the movie because you can't adapt a book like this unless you just have like a 4-hour long movie that like 80% of it takes place in boot camp, which would be the worst movie in history. But I do like a lot of it. I like if I was to adapt the book today, I would keep a lot of the same visuals that Paul Verhoeven had. Like for instance, what's the guy's name? Um, Doogie Howser. What's his name again? Neil Patrick Harris.
Yeah.
I completely forgot his name. I'm sorry, but no, Neil Patrick Harris' character when you see him, he starts off with a like bright-eyed like intelligence officer, and then he starts becoming more SS every single time you see him, and I'm not even joking. Like that was
No, well, I mean, obviously, like looking at the costuming when he shows up in the last scene,
and like
good
there's bags
Lord.
under his eyes. I'm just like, oh man, that guy. But see, like I really liked a lot of those visuals. I like the ships, and I get they can't do the power suit armor because the early '90s and they didn't have the budget to do it. Really, is what it boiled down to. But what they did have, I thoroughly enjoyed. I enjoyed it as a political satire, a saturnization. Is that a word of the book that we read? And I enjoyed those parts uh, of the movie. So yeah.
Cool.
I think I agree with Doug actually 100%. I personally think I like the movie a lot more than I like the book personally. The movie is so much more self-aware, and it like the whole movie's filmed to look like propaganda. Like it's a propaganda movie as a joke more than less than the way that the book is just a propaganda piece. Like you said, the special effects are really haven't really aged that much in the time, like in the almost 20 some years. So like that's really cool. And yeah, like it's a little campy, but I still really enjoyed it overall. What I found really interesting, I was kind of researching into the way the movie was being made, and like Paul Verhoeven, he read 2 chapters of the book, said it sucked, and like didn't even finish it. He was like, and he like just was like, this is a horrible movie, like a horrible book about fascism. And then he wanted to make a World War II movie, but the studio wouldn't let him. So he's like, fine, I'll make Starship Troopers, and then basically make it a war movie. And it was just a whole commentary on fascism at the end of the day. So it's like I thought, in like knowing all this and reading the book, I thought it was very clever the way he did it, and I actually liked the movie more after reading the book because I can see what he's doing more so with it.
Yeah, no, totally. Yeah, I fucking loved the movie. It was so good. Like I had never seen it until last night, and then I was like, holy crap, this is amazing. Also, like I think like very recently I watched Total Recall and RoboCop, and I was like, man, Paul Verhoeven, solid director. Like really,
All those movies are awesome.
I know. Like watching those movies and like watching this one, it's like this is kind of his whole thing, right? Like he uses violence and like explicit sexual content and stuff really well, and he uses it a lot of the times to satirize like society, like especially RoboCop, right? So like knowing that and then going into this movie, I was just like, oh my god, like this is fantastic. Like the opening propaganda recruitment piece is so good. Like when the kid comes out and says like, I'm doing my part too, I was like, it's just so funny. But it's also like it's crazy to me that this movie came out and received such polarizing reviews, And then there were a lot of people that thought that this was a fascist movie. Like there were so many people that thought that Paul Verhoeven was being serious about his like message, and that's just blows my mind because I'm like, dude, like obviously this is a satire. Like look at how insane some of those like the newsreel footages and stuff like that are. And also like Paul Verhoeven apparently did an interview about this, and he said something oh, like I grew up in Nazi occupied Netherlands. like I don't think I'm exactly on the side of fascism here. Like he had like a pretty traumatic experience in Nazism. Like he's very clearly anti-Nazi. So it's just like it's just so ridiculous to me that people thought that like he was being too subtle with his satire.
Yeah.
Reading through some of this, some of the making of the movie, apparently a lot of it was there's a lot of visual homages, I guess you would call them, to like Triumph of the Will and stuff like that. Like apparently the opening recruiting image is like almost a shot for shot take from Triumph of the Will. Yeah, this movie is clearly a satire, and like I really love that part of it. Like there's some just like solidly hilarious moments in it. Like ultimately, like I love this so much more than the book, and definitely I liked it more having read the book. And going back to like my criticisms of the book, a lot of that wasn't present in the movie. Like he does such a better job with his character development than the novel did. The shower scene, where I feel like it was just Paul Verhoeven's chance to like be like, oh, I got all these attractive actors, let's get them to all take their clothes off. But it's
Isn't there
like
a story with that, Ashton?
Yeah, that
Actually,
was the first. I went to try and see it when I was like 6, and it was in the theaters. And my dad was like, "All right," at that scene. That was the point where we walked out.
But no, it's such a crazy like scene for how explicit it is, but it's also so nonchalant that I kind of love it. But it's also like a real sense of camaraderie that you don't see in the novel. Like you don't see these characters like really get to know each other or emote to each other and stuff like that. Whereas in the movie they really do. Like you really get a sense of the fact like Dizzy cares for Rico, or even the fact that like when Carmen dumps him, Ace like is like sympathetic and like trying to like cheer him up and stuff. Like all of those like little bits, some of them are ridiculously corny, but like at least they're there, right? Like the book doesn't have that at all.
He's very gender separatist in the book, right? The mobile infantry is like entirely all men.
Yeah. And like that's the other thing too, is like, man, like we didn't talk about this when we talked about the book, but like it would be great to have a female character, like just one female character. Like they're not present in the book at all. The way he talks to women is just so archaic to like think about. But like in the movie, when you see female characters, it's like, oh wow, like boy, that's refreshing. It's so refreshing to see these characters, these like actual characters have like real personalities and stuff. Like Carmen in the book is such a like throwaway character, and just like keeps showing up every once in a while, and he just describes her as this like tiny Carmen, so small, they're in my pocket, such a sweet little girl. And it's just like, what is this? Like who is this person?
Like, she hasn't seen him in like 5 years. She's like, Carl dies. Like over a candlelit supper. Like,
oh yeah.
By the way, Carl's dead.
Yeah, it's like, oh, he died on Pluto. Well, anyways. Like,
anyways.
your childhood best friend? Yeah, okay, well, anyways. When they talk about Carmen in the actual book, the only physical descriptor that we get of her is that she's pretty and she has dimples. So that's literally what Verhoeven was. He's like, so what's the character? Oh, she's a girl, pretty with dimples. Well, Denise Richards, I guess. I thought, and this is something that we haven't touched on, but for me, sells the movie is the soundtrack. Like that.
Oh,
like
yeah.
Like when they're in the midst of battle and like the dun, and you're just like,
yeah, it is. Like, it is solid soundtrack. Yeah.
And
the same guy who composed RoboCop, which was also just like such an iconic soundtrack. But yeah, no, I loved the music in the movie.
And Clancy Brown, I thought he did an excellent job. Everybody did a good job. It's a good movie. I don't care. People talk crap over it, but every time I watch it, I'm just like, this is a good movie. I'm glad I watched this.
No, it's so solid.
fun.
And even some of the choices in adapting it that make it different from the book, like there's a lot of things that like he takes separately and he takes a lot of liberty on, like having Ratchik be the professor and then later show up in the war as a fighting sergeant
Michael
is so more interesting, you know, like in the book, like fucking Dubois is just a mouthpiece. Like he's such a non-entity and like a character that you don't care about in any way. So the fact that like Rico seems to care about him so much makes no sense to me. Whereas in the movie, having like Michael Ironside come back and like be a character in the war, and then Rico having to kill him at the end of the movie, is so much more effective. It's so much more like powerful.
Rico, you know what to do.
For context, Jesse, myself, and Ashton, we always make these stupid jokes about Starship Troopers where we quote the movie. But Calvin was never able to jump in because he never watched the movie. So as you're watching the movie, what was like when you saw these? What was going through your mind?
I was piecing all of the jokes together.
That's my job you're talking about.
The thing about a lot of our humor is it's mostly just like throwaway dialogue. Like they're not even iconic lines. They're just dumb lines that for some reason stick in our head. It's more like just like, oh my God, that's so stupid. When you put it together. It is such a solid movie. Like all of the like special effects hold up. Not having the combat armor sucks. It would be cool if you got a full adaptation with the combat armor and stuff like that. But for what they had and for, you know, whatever budget they were working with, like they did a solid job in terms of like visual effects, especially some of the gore. Like some of the gore was still absolutely horrifying. Yeah. Like there was a lot of like the gore.
It was scary when I was 6 years old. Like
like it still absolutely holds up, you know, and I think that's a really key part to a lot of these movies is it's like, you know, your visual effects can dip as much as possible, but when the parts that are supposed to be scary or jarring start to lose their effect, then you can say that your visual effects have probably aged quite a bit. But like all of those parts really stick in this movie. Like they're still really disturbing, really tough to look at.
If you compare like Kitten's death in the novel, where he blows up in his pod and doesn't make it down, compared to the movie where he literally gets cut in half by a warrior bug.
Yeah.
Because he's screaming like literally bloody murder, and his torso gets flung at Rico. And then he compared it to like Rico in the book where he's just like, oh, Kitten died.
Yeah, and like even like Dizzy's death is so gory. Because I saw her because I obviously saw her death coming, and the fact that the fact that they have sex the night before and then Michael Ironside gives them make it 20 minutes is such a great part.
The CC's on and it's like make it 15 minutes. You're like, Michael Ironside.
But like it's just so like I saw Dizzy's death coming and I was like, oh, like this is gonna suck because like the character's kind of cool. I was not expecting it to be as violent as it was.
The changes, the differences, like for instance, in the book, I was surprised when they talk about Dizzy, but it's obviously a man that they're talking about, and it's like a one throwaway line, oh, Dizzy died in the drop, and you're just like, oh, wait a second, this person doesn't show up in this novel at all. She becomes a huge part of the movie, but she's barely in the book. She's like in like 5 throwaway lines in the entire book. And then also like the bugs in the book, they describe them as having lasers, and then obviously we don't get the laser bugs, which sucks. Like where are these laser bugs?
Another thing I was going to say that they did a much better job of adapting is Rico's in general, Rico's character development is solid. But like his punishment in the movie, it makes so much more sense than it does in the book. I've read the book twice. I had to like reread that part over and over again because I'm like, wait, why is he being punished exactly? And it's because he took his helmet off, or he took his snoopers off to see it in with his plain eye rather than using his HUD.
He visually saw instead of actually looking at his HUD to say, oh, there are people in this area, there aren't people in this area, right?
And I guess that would be where he would be considered insubordinate.
Sure.
Yeah. Well,
But like
basically, his charge was that he acted in such a way that in a real battle would have killed his own men.
No, yeah, totally, and I understand that, right? It's just that like it's a little hard to pick up in the book.
Yeah.
In the movie, like they make it very clear, like, oh, like this dude's head fucking exploded because of you. And it's like so much more effective. It really puts you into perspective where it's like, oh yeah, makes sense that he's being publicly flogged for this, and then it makes his like decision to quit so much more impactful, right? Like he's quitting because he's like pissed about it and whatnot, whereas in the book I think the punishment happens after he tried to quit and then stayed. In the movie that becomes the catalyst of him being like, I'm done, I'm leaving, whatnot, and then having Buenos Aires be attacked, and him having to like reverse his decision or whatever. It makes a lot more sense. It like that's what I'm talking about. Like that, again, it's like it's kind of cliched, it's kind of corny, because he's like, they killed my parents, so I'm gonna fight the bugs now. Like it is kind of cliched, it is kind of corny, but like it's the most bare bones character development that I feel the novel was lacking. Did anyone have anything else to say about the movie? I took down a couple things that I thought were funny that I noticed during the movie. One is when I think it's after their first drop, where they just get massacred, and Enrico is believed to be dead. And they bring all the wounded aboard the Roger Young. And Denise Richards is like walking through, and then she like looks at the list of casualties, and she's like, so many people killed, almost no wounded. I'm like, what are you talking about? You're surrounded by wounded soldiers, literally just like pools and pools of wounded soldiers there. I could not understand. Like, I think what she meant to say is so few missing in action or something, but it was just like, I think there's a lot of wounded people here. Like, what are you talking about? Just the dude who plays Ace, like just in general, like the worst haircut in the world. Is that Jake Busey?
Oh yeah.
Jake Busey.
Oh my god, I had no idea. Okay,
fresh out of the Frighteners.
Jesus Christ, just the worst haircut in the world.
Frighteners was after Starship Troopers.
Was it? Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
So he was like, sorry, continue.
No, but just his live action Bart Simpson hairstyle, and the fact that like
he plays a violin.
That he's playing the space violin or whatever the hell you call it is, and just like creepily watching Johnny and Dizzy like get it on. I was just like, oh, what the hell?
I love Jake Busey's character, but I don't think like his name's Ace, but I don't think there's a direct adapt. He's not directly adapted from a character unless I missed something. I don't know.
There is an Ace in the book. He's the guy who he's the guy who Johnny fights in the washroom.
Oh yeah.
Disagreeing or whatever.
Yeah.
Not the same character. Yeah.
He's like, hey, I'm a sergeant now, and I'm better than you, and now we have to fight in this bathroom. And I'm like, what the heck?
I still kind of find the part where Clancy Brown throws a knife into his hand funny. And he makes his point there, right? Where he's like, can't you just push a button and launch a nuke down a bug hole, sir? And he's just like, he just gets his hand all stuck there. He's like, oh, you can't push a
Yeah,
button
and
if
what
his
does
hand
he?
isn't there.
Yeah, he can't push a button if a knife is stuck in your hand.
Yeah.
They-
I kinda like that
Again,
part.
that scene in the book
yeah,
is like 15 pages long. Like it goes on for so long.
Yeah.
See,
And talking
He
about
throws it behind his
like
head,
this is
doesn't he?
why you need to learn primitive weapons.
and the thing
And
is I was waiting for that exact where he puts his hand against the wall, and so like for 15 pages, I'm like, this better end with some guy getting stabbed, and it doesn't. I'm like, damn it, I'm not reading this tonight. I'm joking.
yeah,
that is,
no, exactly. Again, I thought much better adaptation than the book. Like the book
Yeah.
just drones on, and Clancy Brown got his point across really, really succinctly. Maybe we could move on to our wrap up, which is where we discuss our dream cast for a modern adaptation of Starship Troopers. Which, by the way, apparently there is a new adaptation of the book that's supposedly in development. And it's supposed to be like a more faithful adaptation of the novel, which I'm just like, I don't know how they're going to do that. Like, I don't know. Like, is it just going to be a straight up Nazi propaganda? Because that would be a faithful adaptation.
Yeah.
But
go ahead. Sorry, we were actually having a really good conversation, and then I just completely.
no, I think we were just talking about the fact that the novel is clearly not satire. I know that Jesse might have thought that, but
That's
like,
scary. Like,
no, and like I understand, but like you were saying, like I don't think people are reading this book and by any stretch of the imagination thinking that like, he has some good points here.
I
like
hope not. Like, that's what I kind of worry about now, that somebody reads this and goes, that's exactly what we need. It's like, I thought this book was like, what happens if fascism, like, if you go down a fascist path. That's what I thought this was kind of like learning, but
yes,
but that's what the movie is, right? Like that's clearly what the movie is. In the commentary, Paul Verhoeven said that like the message of the movie is that war will make fascists of us all, and like that's very clearly what happens in the movie, right? And yeah, if you read the book with that lens, maybe you could see it from that different perspective.
yeah.
But certainly that was not how Robert Heinlein wrote that book. Like he wrote it with a very clear. The movie has been in a production mode for a while, apparently since 2011. Neil H. Morris, producer of films like the Fast and Furious series and I Am Legend, announced plans for a remake of the film. So it's probably going to be great. Like I Am Legend, Fast and Furious. This guy's done some great work.
Vin Diesel letting it up as Rico.
Yep. Honestly, not a bad choice. Like I wouldn't hate.
I'd
Vin
hate
Diesel.
it. I'd be so pissed off watching it. I would still watch it because it's a Starship Troopers adaptation, but I'd be sitting there just stewing, be like, can't believe Vin Diesel's Johnny Rico in this.
Oh.
He's like, hey, I'm in high school now, and he's like, shut up, okay? I hate this man. For me, I would I consider it a miniseries. Why aren't they thinking about a miniseries? You could effectively make a better movie by adding an extra 5 hours to it, right? That would be my, if I was to produce it, if I had the money or whatever, I'd consider that.
I would do a Band of Brothers-esque adaptation where it is an extended miniseries that follows this company around, but you also have interviews with the real people to supplement it.
Yeah, it opens with an interview of an old guy you just hire as an actor. Like, I remember the second Bug War.
I think someone who would be really good to direct a book like this, I would give it to someone like Jordan Peele, because like I feel like there's so much like, just because I would love it. If they adapt this again, I don't want a faithful adaptation. Like certainly not when it comes to like the like ideals that the book stands for and stuff like that. I would want it to like have that kind of satire that Paul Verhoeven had. But I think like Jordan Peele does such a good job with that in his movies. And I feel like it would be like, I feel like it would be a lot more subtle than the 97 movie was. But like so much, like so effective. Like I feel like he would do a really good job of making it this like, this like biting social commentary. But yeah, let's talk about our dream casts for Starship Troopers, the movie, if we were to make one.
None of the characters have any like it's very hard to like nail down any characteristics of these characters. So I found it was very hard to cast. But me and Doug last week discussed, we're trying to figure out like Filipino actors that like would be good for the role, but there's only the two that I like know any of their work, and Dave Bautista and Ned from the guy kid who plays Ned from Spider-Man, and neither of them are good options for the movie at all. Actually, I found out Haley Steinfeld is part Filipino, which I found interesting. So she might be an interesting choice for Carmencita.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or I mean, she could play Rico too. Like they could gender swap the role, and like it could still work.
Yeah,
I agree. And see that, I guess that's also a biting criticism of modern Hollywood, where we can't even think of like with the exception of two people and maybe three, we can't think of any people who would be possibly like Filipino enough to fill this role. For me, if I was adapting a book, it has the ability to be the most diverse cast of any, because with the exception of a few, as I said, there is no distinguishing marks. They don't talk about race really. They talk languages, and the only way to differentiate ethnicities is by looking at people's last names, right? And like with the exception, and so like you could have like Zim could be black, or he could be Chinese or whatever. All we know about him is his first language is in English. Like Blackstone, that's an English name, but Blackstone English is so pronounced. You could basically say he's South African, he's Canadian. You can even say he's Native American. They have a Native American actor, or not an actor, where they just like, also there's Bear Claw, and you're just like, okay, whatever.
Also, they like make reference to his scalp hunting ancestors, which I'm just like, oh god.
I did the exact same thing. I'm just like, oh, okay. Well, thanks for the shout out, Heinlein.
Jesus.
But but and the thing is like, I did enjoy that aspect of the book, but I thought that he didn't mention anything about races, and so you could theoretically have most people in the book, like maybe 60% of the people being non-white, and then the rest, and that would also be a commentary if you did that in a movie to modern military, where the American military is mostly poor people who do it, and poor people happen to be different ethnicities, right? So that could be something you throw into a movie to suggest that, by the way, we rely on these people for our military because they happen to be poorer. So I don't know, that I'm just throwing that out there. I don't know. No, totally. I made this joke to what's his name, this guy, Ashton. And what actor did I say that who should play?
You said John Cena should.
Oh yeah, I said John Cena.
John Cena should just play everybody, and I'd be like, so it's just like the Nutty Professor with John Cena.
Sorry, I completely.
He's also playing the bugs.
Yeah.
The only person I said that this person needs to play is Jean Reno would be Dubois, like the teacher at the beginning. I can see that as like.
Yeah,
I feel like Jean Reno needs some love now too. I haven't seen a Jean Reno movie in a really long time. I don't know what he's up to. What about like all of the like random, again, like this is what sucks about the book, is that these characters are so throwaway.
That's exactly it. It was hard
it's like, who would you cast for Carmen? It's like, well, I don't know a lot about her.
Like I think for me, if I was actually casting this, I would actually just go for a lot of unknowns. I would just be like,
I think so too.
Yeah.
I would also do the exact same thing that Verhoeven did and just pick the most beautiful people possible. And there's a reason behind that, not beyond just like, because this is the idea of like post-fascism world, right? And in every fascism, they always look to a more beautiful standard that exists from among the populace, right? That like having the actors that they did, who are all handsome and beautiful. He was also making a statement about the perfect race and stuff like that. At least that's what I picked up, and I would also keep that same idea and just find the most handsome people I could, and then have that being a thing as well, right? I don't know. Maybe I'm the only one who picked that up, but I was just thinking about that when I was thinking about casting.
Idris Elba's pretty handsome, so that casting sticks.
So basically, just not Gerard Depardieu is anybody else.
God, that's such a cruel burn on Gerard Depardieu.
Look, he's a handsome man. Okay. I'm being a dick. I'm sorry, Gerard. If you're in this podcast, I love you. I thought you were good in Life of Pi. Like, and that movie you did with Andy McDowell back in the 80s. I can't remember what that one was called.
This is our recurring segment where Doug apologizes to Gerard Depardieu.
I'm actually glad I did this podcast with you, because now I do have another appreciation for the movie again. I think the thing is, I was more interested in like the sci-fi elements of this book. Like I wanted to see more of like the soldiers, right? I wanted to see more of essentially Starship Troopers. So, and I guess the movie did kind of fill in, the whole boring parts with good parts. So, yeah, I'm kind of glad I did this podcast, because now I have a new appreciation for the movie.
Sure. Maybe we'll just go around and do our final thoughts, and say which one we prefer, the book or movie. Okay. We'll start with Jesse.
I will say this. I do kind of now like the movie more in like some aspects, but I still wish that I had read the book first and then watched the movie, because I felt like some of the book was corrupted a bit, because I was seeing these characters instead of letting my own mind formulate, what my imagination wanted to in this book, rather than just borrowing from the movie. But now that I think of it, I do quite enjoy the movie a bit more than the book, having this talk and pointing everything out. But yeah, like I thought this was satire, but now that you guys have been pointing out, like, Robert A. Heinlein was an asshole and stuff like that, that it kind of like scares me a bit that somebody might look at this and genuinely like it.
I'm glad I read the book, but I've always enjoyed the movie, and I enjoy it more, I think. So
yeah.
Ashton? It's the same thing for me. It's I'm glad I read it, but at the end of the day, it made me enjoy the movie more, because I can definitely see way more of the satire within the movie because I've read the book. I always saw it as satire, but now because I read the book, I'm like, yeah, this is blatantly ripping into this hard. So I think I enjoy the movie quite a bit more than the book.
Yeah. I think I agree with all the other opinions. Yeah. The book is just so hard. It was so hard to get through. And the movie was like this really like nice palate cleanser, I feel like, because I feel like I was so much in Paul Verhoeven's corner as he was just ripping this book to shreds. I definitely prefer the movie to the book. I'm glad that we started on Starship Troopers, because it's one that I hadn't watched the movie or read the book, and I feel like that's so difficult now. So this was interesting. I feel like I went into it completely cold. Well, I think that pretty much wraps up Starship Troopers by Robert Heinlein, and I believe our next book that we've debated on will be Anne of Green Gables.
Which Doug referenced at the beginning of the podcast, being the Anne of Green Gables podcast.
Yeah. Still up for debate. We might still call it the Anne of Green Gables podcast.
I would just love for someone to open up a Anne of Green Gables podcast, and it was just an hour and a half of talking about Starship Troopers.
Yeah, Anne of Green Gables is a great choice. I Like I was saying to you guys, I've never read or watched it again, so I'm going into it completely cold. This will be the first time I experience it. My partner and her sister talk about it a lot, and I feel like I'm missing out, so I'm glad to get caught up. So it's a series, right? But from what I understand, we're only going to read the first one. We're just reading Anne of Green Gables.
I think
I'm
so.
I think I'm going to eventually try to read all of the books, but yeah, we can just start with the first one.
And what adaptation are we going to watch? Because now there are a lot of adaptations of Anne of Green Gables.
The newest one was released on Netflix, and that's Anne with an E.
The one that apparently is considered the definitive version is from 1985, and it's a CBC miniseries.
Oh yeah.
All of the Starship Troopers fans that came to this podcast to listen to us talk about Starship Troopers are gonna wait for the teaser and be like, dude, next episode's Anne of Green Gables, I'm there.
I'm pretty sure they all clicked off after I started talking crap about Gerard Depardieu.
You're right. You're right.
Because
Starship
the Venn
Troopers.
diagram of Starship Troopers and Gerard Depardieu fans is pretty it's just basically one circle.
That's true.
Sorry guys. Sorry, at this point I think I'm just tired. I'm just trolling at this point. Sorry, go ahead, man.
Okay. Thank you for tuning in to the inaugural episode of Page and Screen, folks. I want to give a special thanks to me and my friend for creating all the music you hear on the show. Check out more of their music by visiting meandmyfriend.bandcamp.com. If you like the show, go ahead and subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you really like us, leave us a review and a rating. Feel free to connect with us on social media. We are at Page and Screen 1 on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. You can also search Page and Screen on YouTube, where you can watch a video version of this show. We post regular updates of all the books we read and all the movies we watch, and we'd love to hear your thoughts on them. We're not the only ones who can offer our unwarranted opinions, so chime in and join the conversation. And finally, make sure you spread the word about the show. If you know a book nerd or a film geek in your life, pass it on. We'd love to reach new people. Maybe you know someone who thinks Starship Troopers the novel is actually better than the movie. Well, they're wrong, and you can offer them this show as empirical evidence. Until the next Page and Screen, thank you for listening.